Vincent Astor despised his half-brother John, so when John demanded his share of the family fortune, Vincent refused, little knowing that it would trigger the downfall of the entire Astor family. The Astor family was never one to stay still. Although John Jacob Astor was born in Germany, he moved to London when he was 16, where he joined his elder brother, George. In November of 1783, America had just reached the end of a long battle for freedom with England, and Astor was 20 years old. He saw an opportunity in this new country and already had connections there. He left his brother George in England to go to his brother Henry in America. He was beginning his journey. The Astors made it to the top by never missing an opportunity. Henry worked in a butcher shop in New York City that he had already established. And when John boarded a ship for America, he had intended to join him in this business. Fate, however, had a different plan in mind. John Jacob Astor made his fortune by paying attention to what was going on around him. While on board the boat that took him to America, Astor met a fur trader. Through his conversation with this man, an idea began to take seed within his mind. A simple conversation with a stranger changed the entire course of his life. When he arrived in New York, he did carry out his original plan to work with his brother in his butcher shop. Yet, the idea of the fur trade never left his mind. Astor opened his own fur goods shop in New York in the late 1780s, only a few years after arriving in the country. He began to purchase raw hides from Native Americans that he prepared himself and then resold to London for great profit. He was at the beginning of his success, and Astor knew it. The Astors knew that the true ticket to success was taking advantage of the opportunities that were around them. In 1794, the Jay Treaty opened up greater trading opportunities. Canada suddenly became an option. John Jacob Astor now had the opportunity to trade in a bigger market, and he did not hesitate to take it. By 1800, a mere 20 years after starting, Astor had earned the modern equivalent of $229 million, and there was a reason for this. He was ruthless. The Astors didn't become one of America's richest families by playing nice. John Jacob Astor did not care for anyone that was working for him. He was looking for his profit and demanded high prices from his traders. In turn, Astor used this to incentivize them to pass along this expense to the indigenous populations that they would trade pelts with. Among other things, the traders used alcohol to get the better of the indigenous people they traded with. But these would not be the last people that the Astors trampled on their way to the top. John Jacob Astor was not afraid of adversity. Although he had already amassed huge amounts of money, there were threats on the horizon. The government designed the US Embargo Act of 1807 to limit external trade and closed off the lucrative Canadian fur trade Astor had gotten comfortable with. It looked like Astor's rise in wealth was finally reaching its downward fall. Astor turned his obstacles into new opportunities. Instead of letting the Embargo Act get in his way, he got the approval of President Jefferson to establish his own company, the American Fur Company. This began Astor's control over the fur trade in not just the Great Lakes area, but the Columbia River region as well. During his rise in the fur trade, Astor was not sitting idly with his money. Instead, he was using his newfound wealth to invest in something that he intended to turn him a profit. New York City real estate became Astor's true passion. The Astor family made their fortune through savvy investments. John Jacob Astor bought his first chunk of land in New York in 1799. He eventually sold his fur business to focus on real estate. He knew when to make a good purchase. Astor did not invest in just any land. He invested his money in land that would give him the most profit and prestige. One of his biggest purchases included a 70-acre farmland in the heart of Manhattan. That would one day become Times Square. It was this land that his descendants would continue to profit upon. Although Astor had 5 surviving children, he only had 2 sons. His eldest son was sickly and considered mentally unstable. Therefore, it was his second son, William Backhouse Astor, who would inherit and carry on the mantle of the Astors. The entire Astor family was industrial. John's brother Henry had also continued to make a name for himself. At the time of his passing, Henry Astor's estate was worth the equivalent of $570 million in today's currency. Having no children, Henry left his estate to his brother's son, William. William became independently wealthy overnight, and he hadn't even inherited his father's wealth yet. At the time of his passing, John Jacob Astor was the richest man in the United States. In modern terms, his entire estate was worth the equivalent of $598 million. Although he left some small bequeathments to other organizations, the bulk of this came to William, adding to what he had inherited from his uncle. And William did not sit idly with his money. The Astor wealth continued to grow under William's guidance. As with any good family, the Astors knew when and how to marry well. William married his second son, William Backhouse Astor Jr., to society belle Caroline Schermerhorn. The Schermerhorn family was one of the oldest in New York, so this union gave the Astors much needed social clout. It also changed the shape of the family forever. Caroline Astor was a social powerhouse, and she knew it. Despite being raised with all the best manners of high society, there was nothing that Lena Astor enjoyed more than lording her status over everyone, including her husband. Due to her family's pedigree, Caroline was the one who married down. She and William's marriage was fraught with tension. Caroline enjoyed reminding her husband who held the social power in their relationship, and William was an indifferent husband, preferring seemingly anything to spending time with his wife. So, Caroline amused herself at others' expense. Caroline Astor filled the void created in her marriage by currying social power and attention from her peers. She frequently hosted lavish balls and events, taking great enjoyment in excluding those that did not meet her standards. However, for all her clout, Caroline still felt short of the one thing she wanted most. It wasn't just her husband that Caroline Astor didn't get along with. The truth was, Caroline was generally disliked by the entire Astor clan. There was an extra layer of animosity between Caroline and her husband's older brother, John Jacob Astor III, and his wife, Charlotte Augusta Gibbs, and her sister-in-law was in Caroline's way. As the wife of the youngest Mr. Astor, she did not have a claim on the title that she truly wanted, being the Mrs. Astor. Caroline wouldn't put up with this for long. Suddenly, in 1887, Caroline got everything that she had wished for. Her sister-in-law passed suddenly, and the title that she coveted for so long was finally up for grabs. Caroline was going to make the title Mrs. Astor hers, except her years of cold relationships with her in-laws meant they weren't going to give her title so easily. Charlotte and John's son, William Waldorf, was perfectly aware of how much his mother disliked Caroline, and he wasn't ready to simply give her the pleasure of the title his mother had guarded for so many years. He wanted to give the title to his own wife, Mammy. Astor family was beginning to rip itself apart. Caroline Astor was as ruthless as her in-laws before her. Although the families feuded over the matter for a few months, Caroline carried away the title before William and Mammy had truly gotten their battle plan together. Caroline was finally the Mrs. Astor, but William continued the fight. Astors don't back down from a fight, and William was no different. Caroline found herself one morning waking in her home to an unseemly sight. No longer did she see the former house of her brother-in-law, John Jacob Astor III, next door, but rather a construction site. This was just the start of William's plan. William's plan was as conniving as any Astor could hope to aspire to. In the place of his father's former mansion, he built a towering hotel, the Waldorf. Not only did this building dwarf Caroline's mansion next door, but it slighted Caroline where it hurt, her status. Respectable society did not visit hotels. Caroline went to battle. The Astors did not lose, and certainly not to Caroline Astor. She and her son, John Jacob Astor IV, conspired to retaliate against their relatives. In the end, they settled on a simple plan: outdo them at their own game. They built their own hotel, the Astoria. Not only was the Astoria larger than the Waldorf, it emphasized who had the right to the Astor name. William started the games, but Caroline finished them. In an ironic twist of fate, the Waldorf and the Astoria would eventually merge into the now famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The Astor family, however, can't say the same. Caroline's final move in the feud was so well executed that it eventually chased William Waldorf right to England. Bigger problems, however, were coming for the Astors, right from Caroline's blood. William Backhouse and Caroline Astor had 5 children, the youngest of which being their only son, John Jacob Astor IV. Jack, as he was known, made a good marriage to Ava Lowell Willing, a respected American socialite, just as was expected of him as the son of the Mrs. Astor. Unfortunately, this union was not as perfect as it may have seemed. Despite having 2 children, Jack and Ava's union was not a happy one. Only 1 year after the passing of his mother, Jack and Ava divorced. If this wasn't scandal enough, what came next ruined their good name forever. Ava and Jack divorced in November of 1909. Just shy of 2 years later, in September of 1911, John Jacob Astor IV married again. Astor's second marriage was to 18-year-old Madeline Talmadge Force. He was 47 years old at the time of this marriage. The Astor's image was truly sunk, metaphorically and soon literally. The newest Astor couple took an extended honeymoon that took them traveling as far as Egypt. While abroad, the couple discovered that Madeline was pregnant. Astor wanted to ensure that his newest child was born in America, so they immediately booked passage on the newest and most extravagant ship, the Titanic. The rude awakening that Madeline and Jack Astor received on that fateful night in April 1912 has been stamped into history. Bundled in their warmest clothes, Astor helped his pregnant wife climb through a first-class promenade window to the safety of a lifeboat. He wasn't as lucky. Although Astor asked the officer in charge of the lifeboat if he could join his wife, given her condition, the officer refused. The lifeboats were for women and children only. Despite his calm promises that he would see Madeline in the morning, John Jacob Astor IV was among the hundreds of Titanic victims. If this wasn't tragic enough, Astor left a shattered and divided family behind. 3 months after surviving the sinking, Madeline Astor gave birth to the child that his father would never meet, John Jacob Astor VI, known as Jakey. Although Jakey survived the sinking, his father's legacy of scandal would follow him for the rest of his life. Jack Astor left misfortune in the wake of his passing. Jack didn't account for his new wife in his will, providing her with some assets from his estate. However, they were relatively small and came with conditions. Madeline could only continue to access Astor's money if she did not remarry. Having just learned about his then unborn son before boarding the Titanic, Jack Astor had not had time to update his will to include him. Furthermore, he left behind 2 children from a previous marriage. Even before he was born, Jakey was already at a disadvantage. Jakey's father had thought to include a bequest of $3 million for any other surviving child. However, Jakey could not access it until he turned 21. The bulk of the Astor fortune went to his eldest brother, William Vincent Astor, and Vincent had not forgiven his father for the damage he'd done to their family. Vincent Astor was 20 when he inherited the bulk of his family's money, amounting to millions of dollars. Up to this point, the Astor family had carried on growing their wealth at the expense of others. They were, without a doubt, slumlords, even in the 20th century. This didn't sit well with Vincent. Vincent Astor was something unknown to America at this time. An Astor with a highly developed social conscience. He did not enjoy learning that his family benefited from years of others' suffering. He put the bulk of his family's wealth into a charitable organization in his name and set about transforming their previous slum housing into property that actually served the people. He married 3 times, and while the third stuck, it came about in a strange way. Vincent Astor married Roberta Brooke Russell on October 8, 1953. Only a month before that, he had been married to his second wife, Mary Benedict Cushing. It was a popular rumour at the time that Astor would only grant Cushing a divorce if she found him another wife to marry. Regardless of the circumstances, this marriage proved profitable for Brooke Astor. Despite his focus on philanthropic work, when Vincent Astor passed on in February 1959, he still left behind a sizable Astor estate. It was at this time his half-brother, Jakey Astor, came back into the picture. However, if Jakey expected his time had come to finally inherit his portion of their father's estate, he was wrong. Vincent Astor despised Madeline, and therefore he despised his half-brother as well. His contempt for both his stepmother and half-brother went so deep that he was not shy in stating his belief that Jakey was not in fact a real Astor. Vincent had no interest in playing nice with the other half of his family or giving them money, but he never could have foreseen that this would lead to the downfall of all the Astors. Vincent Astor left his entire estate to his third wife, Brooke Astor, and the cracks that had long existed in the Astor family finally broke open. Jakey said that Vincent had the legal, not the moral right to keep all the money. He was also willing to put his own money where his mouth was. Jakey filed a lawsuit against Vincent's widow, Brooke, for the inheritance that he felt that he was owed. If he thought this would work, then Jakey didn't know who he was up against. Brooke Astor was not the sort to back down from a fight. Dressed in her best morning outfit, Brooke cried in front of the court. She won, and Jakey settled for $250,000, a fraction of what he was owed. Brooke may have defeated Jakey, but she would also bring about the downfall of the Astors. Brooke Astor was far from a young maiden, and when she married Vincent, Brooke had been married twice already, and those marriages left their legacy. She had one son, Anthony Tony Dryden Marshall, from her first marriage. Marshall would be the undoing of not just his mother, but all the Astors. Brooke Astor's first marriage to Marshall's father was difficult. While they escaped that marriage when Marshall was 6 years old, the tensions from that union carried on throughout each of their lives. Brooke's attempt to move on from that left her son feeling neglected. Around the turn of the millennium, it became clear that Brooke Astor was suffering from Alzheimer's. As her confusion grew, her son Tony Marshall finally saw his chance for retribution. Once Brooke's diagnosis was official, Marshall became her power of attorney, giving him complete power over her estate. He isolated his mother to increase his power over her. He sold off her valuables and took her estate. He was chipping away at the Astor fortune one piece at a time. Tony Marshall had dismissed every member of staff that Brooke Astor may have had to protect her. He convinced her that she was now poor and left to live in squalor, counting pennies. The Astor's great error was on its last legs. Brooke Astor's salvation came from an unexpected place. Tony Marshall had twins from a previous marriage that even Vincent Astor had taken to. It was Marshall's son who noticed his actions and initiated a lawsuit. Things started to look up for Brooke as she moved into a comfortable estate. She lived for another year before passing at the ripe old age of 105. A few months later, Marshall was officially indicted. The damage, however, was done. Between Jack Astor's scandal, Vincent's philanthropy, and Tony Marshall's theft, the vast Astor wealth and social standing had dwindled to nothing more than a memory. However, it is a memory that continues to live on across the globe. From New York to Oregon and even England, you can still find shadows of what the Astors once were. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.